Alright, so in this video we're going to use a for loop to populate an array. And this is just to give us some practice with for loops. This will probably be, for most of you at least, your first program using a for loop. And we'll do that, and we'll do a couple of other things. This is also going to be practice writing almost entirely from scratch a new program. And I'll also show you how to change your environment variables in Visual Studio to, for your viewing comfort and stuff. And I'm doing it mostly so that you can more easily see the code that I'm writing as I write it on this video, because I haven't quite mastered the whole zoom thing for these videos. So I'm going to double-click Visual Studio. We get the Visual Studio startup screen. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to create a console app in C++. Next, I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to call it Arrays, because that's what we're gonna be populating with this. So create, and basically now you know what's going to happen, right? It's just going to rewrite the Hello World program for me. Yeah, there it is, Hello World. And I am going to erase all of the comments here at the bottom, and I'm going to erase the one and only command that this code has so far, which is that out command, hello world. So now you can see that we're starting with only the include statement for the IO stream and the main function, but no code inside the main function yet. All right, and now so that things are going to be a little bit easier to see, I'm going to go here to Tools in Visual Studio, Tools, Options, and then I'm going to find Fonts and Colors. There it is, Fonts and Colors, and I'm going to blow it up to 16. Now you don't have to do this on your own system, but this is also where you would do things like set up your contrast, like for this background. If you want to look at a white background and dark text, you can do that. But after hours and hours of programming, that can kind of tire your eyes out. So I like to have the dark background and light text. It's a much darker image to look at, so that it's a lot easier on your eyes for hours and hours of programming, which I know you're all going to be doing soon. All right, and so you can you can change other things about how Visual Studio looks and acts for you. But now I just changed that font so you can see more easily the font size, so that you can see hopefully more easily the code that I'm writing. All right, so now we're starting with an almost entirely blank program, and what I said we wanted to do was write a for loop and make that loop populate an array. So the first thing we're going to need is a variable to count how many times it goes through the loop, and that's going to be an integer variable, so an int, and I'm just going to call it I. I is very commonly what we use as an index variable. And I'm also going to have to declare an array, and I'll just go ahead and make it an int array to make things simple. And I'll just call it my array, and then open square bracket. And remember, as soon as you type, for most things for Visual Studio, as soon as you type something that needs a pair, like an open curly bracket, an open parenthesis, or an open square bracket, it'll go ahead and type the closing bracket for you at that time. Sometimes that's nice, sometimes it's a pain in the neck, because you actually don't want that closed bracket at that place, but nevertheless Visual Studio does it for you. All right, and now we need to decide how big to make this array, and I'm just going to make it 10 units or 10 slots in size or length, and then that's all we need for now. So I'm going to do a semicolon there, and now let's write our loop. So for I equals 0, now that statement right there sets the variable I equal to 0, semicolon, I less than the length of our array, which was 10, semicolon. And then every time we go through the for loop, we want to increment I by 1. So I plus plus will increase the value of I. So I is going to start at 0. As long as it's less than 10, it's going to run through the loop. And then once it's done running through the loop, it's going to increase the value of I by 1. So then it'll be 1. It'll start at I equals 1. Is I still less than 10? Yes. Run through the loop. I becomes 2, and so on. All right. And now a curly bracket for what we're going to actually do in the loop. And again, Visual Studio there is putting, I just typed in the open bracket, and it put in the closing bracket. I'm going to hit enter, because I'm going to write several commands here, not just one. So I hit enter, and now I've got now I can start entering commands, and you see that Visual Studio there did my formatting for me, so that my formatting looks like good, nicely formatted code. All right, and so what I want to do inside this loop is make the value of my array, and which value? Because my array is going to have 10 different values. Well, I want to make the ith value, right? So I'm on the ith iteration through this loop. I want to make that ith value equal to something, and I can make it equal to whatever I want. I'm actually going to make it, for now, just do something really simple, make it equal to I, semicolon. And now the last thing I need to be able to do is actually see that it's actually done that for me. So I need a cout command. And in my cout command, there's an open paren for you, and it went ahead and put in the close paren. In the cout command, I need to tell it what I want to put out onto the screen, and what I want it to display to me is an integer. So I need to tell it %i for integer, and then I need to tell it which integer I want to display. And what I want to display is my array I, the ith value for my array. Okay, now there's one more thing that I have forgotten to do that I need to do. Remember that cout is a command from a particular namespace, the namespace std, and I need to tell the compiler that I'm using that namespace. I could do it every time I use one of the commands from the std namespace, or I can just do it up here one time, using namespace std, semicolon. I'm going to hit enter again to give myself a little space there, just to keep the formatting nice. And now I think this will work. I think this will do what we want it to do. I just run it in the local Windows debugger here. Of course, it's going to pull up on my other screen, and yep, there we go. So there's our output, just that first line right there. And you can see it started at 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way up to 9, exactly what I asked it to do. All right, I'm going to just modify that a little bit to make it a little bit nicer to look at. I'm going to put in another cout command here. Open, oops, not a curly bracket, a parenthesis. There we go. And I'm going to put a carriage return, \n. And now it should print just one number on each line. Look at that. So 0, 1, 2, and so on. Perfect. All right. So now we've figured out how it's going to go through the for loop. I want to show you a couple of just tips. Well, first let's make our for loop do something just a little bit more interesting. All right, let's make our for loop do something a little bit more interesting than just make my array equal to I. Let's make it equal to I plus I. Why not? All right, so let's run it. And here we go, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 now, instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So easy enough. Now let me show you a way to just make your code a little bit more elegant, but also a little bit more usable, or a little bit more changeable, more adaptable, so more easily changed. So instead of declaring the size of my array right here, and then the number of times I want it to go through the for loop right here, I'm going to define. I'm going to use a definition here. So we're going to pound define. Let's call it array size 10, and then my array is of size array size, and I want this loop to go the number of times there we go, array size. So why do it? Well, first of all, let's confirm that that works. Run it, and sure enough, it's doing exactly the same thing it was doing. Now, why do it that way instead of just having the number 10 here and the number 10 here? Well, because now I can do this. Let's say I want it to run 30 times. Let's run it, see what happens. Sure enough, There it ran 30 times. So suppose, for example, that I was going to use this array size 50 different times in my code, right? And then I decide I want to change this array size. Maybe I wanted to start it at 10, but then I wanted to change it to 30. I don't want to have to go through my code and find every instance where I said do it 10 times and change that every one of those 10s to 30. By doing it this way and defining a constant value and calling it something that I can remember what that means, I can just change it the one time here in the definition statement, and it automatically gets changed every time it appears in the code, and that way I don't have to hunt through my code and then try to figure out why my code's not acting properly because I missed the one out of those 30 or 40. And 30 or 40, by the way, not an exaggeration, the number of times you sometimes have to use these variables. I would say even in some code 300 or 400 times you have to use a particular constant value. So it's no exaggeration to say it would take you a long time to hunt through relatively complex code looking for these things. But if you've done it in this way, if you've constructed your code this way, where you've defined the constant up here in your definitions and then used it down here in all this complex code that you're going to be writing, you change it up here in the definition and it automatically gets changed everywhere you used it throughout the code. And that is often going to save you just a lot of headaches. All right, I think that's enough for now. We're a little bit over 10 minutes on this. I think that's long enough. You've had enough fun. We'll come back to it in a future video.